The trial became the talk of the town, drawing attention not just locally but across the country. Reporters camped outside Evelyn and Harold's home, eager to capture every detail of the case that had unraveled 70 years of seemingly perfect marriage. The headlines ranged from sensational, "Beloved husband exposed as fugitive," to more sympathetic, "Can love redeem a troubled past?" For Evelyn, the constant scrutiny was exhausting, but she refused to let it keep her away from the courtroom. She attended every session, sitting in the front row with her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her eyes fixed on Harold. Harold, now frail and visibly aged by the weight of his secrets, sat quietly at the defense table. He wore a suit that Evelyn had ironed for him the night before the trial began, its neatness a small attempt to preserve some semblance of dignity. His lawyer argued that while Harold, or Henry Grayson, had indeed lived a troubled life in his youth, there was no concrete evidence tying him to violent crimes. The accusations of theft and fraud were undeniable, but those incidents occurred decades ago, and Harold had since transformed into a law-abiding citizen. Witnesses took the stand one by one, painting conflicting portraits of the man Evelyn thought she knew. Some recounted tales of deceit and manipulation, describing how Henry Grayson had swindled them or left chaos in his wake. Others spoke of kindness and generosity, recalling acts of charity Harold had performed over the years. One elderly neighbor even testified about how Harold had once saved her dog from drowning during a storm, an act so simple yet profound that it brought tears to Evelyn's eyes. Throughout it all, Harold remained stoic, rarely speaking unless directly questioned. When he did, his voice carried a quiet remorse. "I won't deny who I was," he told the judge during his testimony, "but I also won't deny who I've become. Meeting Evelyn changed me. Loving her gave me a reason to be better." Evelyn listened intently, her emotions torn between anger and compassion. She hated the lies, the decades spent hiding behind a false identity. Yet she couldn't ignore the sincerity in Harold's words, or the way he looked at her whenever their eyes met across the crowded room. There was pain in his gaze, yes, but also gratitude, as if he still believed she held the power to save him. As the days dragged on, the prosecution pushed hard to prove Harold's involvement in more serious crimes, particularly the disappearances linked to his past. However, without conclusive evidence, their arguments began to falter. The defense countered by highlighting Harold's clean record over the past 7 decades, emphasizing his contributions to the community and his devotion to Evelyn. By the time closing statements rolled around, the jury seemed divided, their faces unreadable as they filed out to deliberate. It took 3 tense days for the verdict to come back, guilty on charges of fraud and forgery related to his younger years, but acquitted of any connection to violent crimes. Given his advanced age and lack of recent offenses, the judge sentenced Harold to house arrest under strict supervision. As the gavel struck, Evelyn felt a strange mix of relief and sorrow. Justice had been served, but at what cost? When Harold returned home, the atmosphere between them was different. The easy comfort they'd shared for so many years was replaced by an awkward tension. They moved around each other cautiously, unsure of how to bridge the chasm that had formed. Evelyn spent hours staring at old photographs, trying to reconcile the man in the pictures with the one sitting silently in the living room. It wasn't hatred she felt. It was confusion, betrayal, and a lingering hope that maybe, just maybe, love could endure even this. For Harold, the guilt weighed heavily. He tried to speak to Evelyn, to explain himself further, but she would only nod politely and change the subject. The silence between them grew louder with each passing day, until it became clear that forgiveness, if it came at all, would take time. And so, they waited. 2 people bound by 70 years of history, now navigating uncharted waters where trust had been broken and redemption felt uncertain. In the weeks that followed the trial, Evelyn and Harold's lives settled into an uneasy rhythm. The reporters eventually moved on to fresher stories, leaving their quiet seaside town behind. But the scars of the past lingered like storm clouds refusing to dissipate. Evelyn found herself replaying moments from their life together in her mind, searching for clues she might have missed. Signs of the man Harold used to be hidden beneath the layers of kindness and devotion he had shown her. Harold, now confined to house arrest with an ankle monitor, spent most of his days sitting by the window watching the waves roll in. He rarely spoke unless spoken to, as if afraid that anything he said might push Evelyn further away. When she did address him, it was often with practical questions. Did you take your medication? Or would you like tea? The warmth they once shared seemed distant, replaced by a fragile politeness that neither of them knew how to break. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the room in hues of orange and pink, Evelyn finally broke the silence. She sat across from Harold at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug of chamomile tea. For a long moment, she simply studied him, the lines etched deeply into his face, the way his shoulders sagged under the weight of his regrets. Then softly she asked, "Do you think people can truly change?" Harold looked up, startled by the question. His eyes searched hers, perhaps hoping to find forgiveness there, or at least understanding. "I don't know," he admitted after a pause. "But I do know I changed. You changed me, Evelyn. Before I met you, I was lost. You gave me purpose. You made me want to be someone worth loving." Evelyn didn't respond right away. Instead, she thought back to the early days of their marriage, when Harold had been so determined to build a good life for them. She remembered how hard he worked, odd jobs to make ends meet, how he'd always put her needs before his own. Could all of that have been real if he were still the same man he'd been before? Or had he simply become better at hiding who he really was? "I believe you loved me," she said finally, her voice steady but tinged with sadness. "And maybe you did change. But trust isn't something you can just rebuild overnight, Harold. It takes time." He nodded slowly, accepting her words without argument. "I understand," he replied, "and I'll spend whatever time I have left trying to earn it back, if you'll let me." From that night on, their conversations grew, more frequent, though they remained cautious. They talked about everything, their children, their grandchildren, the little joys and sorrows of everyday life, but avoided delving too deeply into the past. Slowly, tentatively, Evelyn began to soften. She realized that while she couldn't erase the pain Harold's secrets had caused, she also couldn't deny the decades of love and happiness they had shared. One afternoon, as they sat side by side, on the porch, Evelyn reached over and took Harold's hand in hers. It was a small gesture, but it carried immense meaning. Harold's eyes filled with tears, and for the first time in months he allowed himself to hope. As the seasons changed, so did their relationship. Forgiveness didn't come easily. It was messy and imperfect, but it came nonetheless. Evelyn chose to focus not on the man Harold had been, but on the man he had become because of her. And Harold, grateful for even a fraction of her trust, vowed never to take it for granted again. Their story wasn't one of perfect love or flawless redemption. It was human, complicated, and raw. Yet in its imperfection lay a truth both beautiful and humbling. Love isn't about finding someone without flaws. It's about choosing to stay despite them. As they watched another sunset together, Evelyn rested her head on Harold's shoulder, finding solace in the knowledge that some bonds, no matter how tested, are meant to last until the very end. Emily lived in a quiet suburban neighborhood where everything seemed picture-perfect from the outside. Her house, with its neatly trimmed hedges and freshly painted shutters, looked like it belonged on a postcard. But inside, things weren't as peaceful as they appeared. For the past 2 years, life had become increasingly tense since her mother remarried. Emily tried to adjust to having a stepfather around, but something about him always made her feel uneasy. Mark, her stepfather, was the kind of man who could charm anyone within seconds. Neighbors loved him because he always offered to help fix their fences or carry groceries. At family gatherings, he cracked jokes that left everyone laughing. Even Emily's teachers thought highly of him when he attended parent-teacher meetings. To most people, Mark seemed like the perfect addition to their family. But for Emily, there was an invisible wall between them, one she couldn't quite explain, even to herself. It started with small things at first, like how Mark would enter her room without knocking, even though she'd asked him multiple times not to, or how he'd stand too close while talking to her, making her instinctively take a step back. These moments were subtle, almost unnoticeable, but they added up over time. Each one planted a tiny seed of discomfort deep inside her chest, growing larger every day. One evening after dinner, Emily decided to talk to her mom about it. She waited until Mark was busy washing dishes before pulling Sarah aside. "Mom," Emily began hesitantly, "can we talk? It's about Mark." Sarah raised an eyebrow, curious but slightly annoyed. "What now, Em? You've been acting strange lately." Emily swallowed hard, trying to find the right words. "He keeps coming into my room without asking, and sometimes he says weird stuff, like calling me grown-up all of a sudden. It feels off." Sarah sighed, crossing her arms. "Honey, you're probably just reading too much into it. Mark's harmless. He's just trying to bond with you. He's your stepdad, remember? Give him a chance." But Emily didn't believe that. She knew what she felt wasn't normal, no matter how much her mom brushed it off. Still, arguing with Sarah only made her more frustrated. So, she dropped the subject. For now. As days turned into weeks, Emily found herself becoming quieter and more withdrawn. She avoided spending time alone with Mark whenever possible, sticking close to her mom instead. But even then, Sarah didn't seem to notice how uncomfortable Emily was. Instead, she kept encouraging her daughter to get along with Mark, saying things like, "You're both part of this family now, we need to make it work." Deep down, Emily wanted to scream. Why wouldn't her mom listen? Didn't she see how hard it was for her? But screaming wouldn't solve anything. All Emily could do was retreat further into herself, hoping against hope that things would somehow get better. Little did she know, this was only the beginning of a long and difficult journey, one that would test her courage, challenge her trust, and ultimately change her life forever. As the days passed, Emily began noticing more things about Mark that made her uncomfortable. At first, it was easy to dismiss these moments as coincidences or misunderstandings, but they kept happening over and over again. One afternoon, while helping him clean up after dinner, Mark leaned closer than usual to hand her a plate. His fingers brushed against hers longer than necessary, and he gave her a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "You're growing up so fast," he said in a tone that sent shivers down her spine. Emily froze for a moment, unsure how to respond. She forced a polite "thank you," and quickly turned away, pretending to focus on drying the dishes. But her mind raced with questions. Why did he say that? Was it just an innocent comment, or was there something else behind it? The uncertainty gnawed at her, making it hard to concentrate on anything else. Later that night, lying in bed, Emily replayed the incident in her head. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Finally, she decided to tell her mom about it. Sarah was sitting on the couch scrolling through her phone when Emily approached her. "Mom, can I talk to you?" she asked softly. Sarah looked up, slightly irritated by the interruption. "What is it now, Em?" "It's about Mark," Emily said, fidgeting with the hem of her shirt. "Tonight when we were doing the dishes, he said something weird. He told me I'm growing up fast, and it felt strange, like not normal." Sarah sighed deeply, setting her phone aside. "Emily, seriously? You're reading way too much into this. He's just complimenting you. Maybe you should stop being so sensitive." "But it wasn't just that," Emily insisted, her voice trembling. "He touched my hand for no reason, and it felt wrong. Mom, please believe me." Sarah frowned, clearly annoyed. "Look, Emily, Mark has done nothing but try to be nice to you. If you keep accusing him of things, it's going to ruin our family. Do you want that? Because I don't." The conversation ended there, leaving Emily feeling worse than before. Her mom's words echoed in her mind. If you keep accusing him. Did Sarah really think she was lying? Or was she deliberately ignoring the truth because it was easier that way? Over the next few weeks, Emily tried to avoid Mark as much as possible. She spent hours in her room, burying herself in books or drawing pictures to distract herself. But even then, she couldn't escape the growing sense of unease that followed her everywhere. Mark's behavior hadn't changed. He still found excuses to touch her shoulder or pat her back whenever they crossed paths. And each time it happened, Emily felt smaller and more powerless. One day, while walking home from school, Emily confided in her best friend, Mia. They sat on a park bench, sharing snacks and chatting about their day. When the topic shifted to Mark, Emily hesitated at first, unsure if she should share her feelings. But Mia could tell something was bothering her. "Hey, what's wrong?" Mia asked gently. "You've been quiet all week." After a long pause, Emily finally opened up. "It's Mark," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "He says weird things and acts like, I don't know, like he's watching me or something. My mom won't listen, though. She thinks I'm making it up." Mia listened carefully, her expression turning serious. "That sounds really scary, Em. Are you okay? Have you thought about telling someone else? Like a teacher or counselor?" Emily shook her head. "No one will believe me. Everyone loves Mark. They'll just think I'm jealous or trying to cause trouble." Mia placed a reassuring hand on Emily's shoulder. "I believe you," she said firmly. "And if you ever need help, I'm here for you. Don't give up, okay?" For the first time in weeks, Emily felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe she wasn't completely alone in this after all. But deep down, she knew the hardest part was yet to come. Convincing others, and especially her mom, wouldn't be easy. And until then, she had no choice but to face each day with fear lingering in the pit of her stomach. It was a quiet, moonlit night when everything changed for Emily. She had been tossing and turning in bed, unable to fall asleep. Her mind wouldn't stop racing with thoughts about Mark, her mom, and the growing tension that seemed to fill every corner of their home. Just as she finally started to drift off, a faint creak outside her bedroom door jolted her awake. At first, Emily thought it might just be the house settling, a sound she'd heard countless times before. But then came another noise, softer, but unmistakable. The gentle shuffle of feet on the carpeted hallway floor. Her heart began to pound as she sat up slowly, straining her ears to listen. The doorknob to her room turned ever so slightly, and the door cracked open just enough for someone to peek inside. Through the sliver of light from the hallway, Emily could see Mark standing there, silhouetted against the dim glow. He wasn't saying anything, just standing still, watching her sleep. Or at least he had been until she woke up. For what felt like an eternity, they stared at each other, Emily frozen in fear, and Mark looking startled, as if he hadn't expected her to. "Catch him. What are you doing?" Emily finally managed to whisper, her voice trembling. Mark hesitated, clearly caught off guard. Then, without missing a beat, he straightened up and gave her one of his usual smiles, the kind that always seemed too polished to be genuine. "Oh, hey, kiddo," he said casually, rubbing the back of his neck. "I thought I heard something in here. Guess I was wrong." Emily's stomach churned. "You heard something? In my room? At this time of night?" "Yeah, must have been nothing," Mark replied quickly, already backing away toward the hallway. "Sorry if I scared you. Go back to sleep, okay?" As soon as he closed the door behind him, Emily bolted out of bed and locked it, even though they rarely used locks in the house. Her hands were shaking so badly that it took 3 tries to slide the small latch into place. Once it clicked shut, she leaned against the door, trying to steady her breathing. What had just happened? Why had Mark been standing there watching her? The next morning, Emily couldn't wait to confront him. As soon as she saw him sitting at the kitchen table sipping coffee, she blurted out, "Why were you in my doorway last night?" Mark nearly spilled his mug, caught off guard by her directness. "What are you talking about?" he asked, feigning confusion. "You know exactly what I mean," Emily shot back, her voice rising. "You were standing there staring at me while I slept." Mark laughed nervously, glancing toward Sarah, who was busy making breakfast. "Whoa, slow down. I wasn't staring at you. I told you I thought I heard a noise, that's all." Before Emily could argue further, Sarah stepped in, clearly irritated by the commotion. "Emily, stop causing drama," she snapped. Mark already explained himself. Can we please have a calm morning for once? But Mom, he was... Emily started only to be cut off again. Enough, Sarah said sharply, slamming a plate onto the counter. I don't want to hear another word about this. You're being ridiculous. Tears stung Emily's eyes as she realized her mom wasn't going to believe her, not even after last night. Feeling defeated, she grabbed her backpack and stormed out of the house, heading to school early just to escape the suffocating atmosphere. All day, Emily replayed the incident in her mind. Every detail, the way Mark had stood silently, the fake smile he'd given her, the dismissive tone in his voice, felt like pieces of a puzzle she couldn't quite put together. By the time she returned home that evening, she knew she needed proof. If no one would believe her words, maybe evidence would speak louder. That night, Emily quietly pulled out a notebook from her desk drawer. On the first page, she wrote the date and described everything that had happened the previous night. She vowed to document every strange interaction with Mark moving forward. It wasn't much, but it made her feel like she was taking back some control over her life. Even if her mom refused to listen, Emily was determined to protect herself and find a way to make the truth undeniable. Over the next few days, Emily became more determined than ever to keep track of Mark's behavior. She carried her notebook everywhere, jotting down even the smallest details whenever something strange happened. At first, it felt awkward, like she was living in a constant state of suspicion. But soon, it gave her a sense of purpose. Writing things down made her feel less powerless, as if she were building a case that no one could ignore. One evening, while helping Sarah fold laundry in the living room, Mark walked in and casually draped an arm around Emily's shoulders. "How's my favorite teenager doing today?" he asked with a grin, squeezing just a little too tightly. Emily stiffened, forcing herself to smile back. "I'm fine," she muttered, pulling away as subtly as possible. As soon as he left the room, she grabbed her notebook from under the couch cushion where she'd hidden it and scribbled, "Mark put his arm around me during laundry. Felt uncomfortable. He does this often." Sarah noticed her daughter's distracted expression and sighed. "Emily, can you focus for once? You've been acting so distant lately." "I'm focusing," Emily replied defensively, though her mind was already racing with thoughts about how to make her mom see the truth. But arguing wouldn't help, not yet. For now, she needed to stay patient and gather more evidence. At school, Emily struggled to concentrate on her classes. During lunch, she found herself sitting alone at a corner table, staring at her half-eaten sandwich. That's when Mia approached her, concern written all over her face. "Hey, Em," Mia said softly, sliding onto the bench beside her. "You look like you haven't slept in days. What's going on?" Emily hesitated, unsure if she should share what she'd been doing. But Mia had always been her closest friend, the one person who believed her when others didn't. Finally, she whispered, "I've been keeping notes about Mark. Everything he says or does that makes me uncomfortable, I write it down." Mia's eyes widened. "That's smart. Do you think it'll help convince your mom?" "I don't know," Emily admitted, her voice cracking slightly. "But I have to try. If I show her enough proof, maybe she'll finally understand." Mia nodded, thoughtfully. "Let me see some of them," she suggested gently. "Maybe I can help you figure out what to say to your mom." Reluctantly, Emily pulled out the small notebook from her bag and handed it to Mia. Her friend flipped through the pages, reading each entry carefully. Some were short descriptions of incidents, while others included exact quotes from Mark. By the time she finished, Mia looked both shocked and angry. "This is insane," Mia said firmly, closing the notebook. "He's crossing lines, Em. You're not imagining things." For the first time in weeks, Emily felt a flicker of hope. Maybe having someone else validate her experiences would give her the courage to take the next step. Still, fear lingered. In the back of her mind, what if her mom reacted the same way as before? Or worse, what if Mark found out what she was doing? That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Emily lay awake staring at the ceiling. She couldn't stop thinking about how fragile her situation was. One wrong move and everything could fall apart. But giving up wasn't an option anymore. She had to protect herself, and somehow find a way to expose the truth without making things worse. As the hours ticked by, Emily came up with a plan. She decided to record audio memos on her phone whenever something happened, capturing Mark's words exactly as they were said. It was risky. If anyone discovered the recordings, there would be no denying what she was doing, but it might be the only way to prove her point. With trembling hands, she opened a new memo file and whispered, "Start documenting everything, no turning back now." The weight of her decision pressed heavily on her chest, but deep down, Emily knew she was doing the right thing. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she wasn't completely alone in this fight. And even though the road ahead was uncertain, she clung to the hope that someday, somehow, the truth would come out and justice would follow. That night, Emily woke up to the sound of muffled voices drifting through the walls. At first, she thought she was imagining it, maybe a dream or the wind rattling the windows. But as she strained to listen, she realized the sounds were coming from downstairs. Her heart began to race. Who could be talking at this hour? Quietly, she slipped out of bed and tiptoed to her door, pressing her ear against the wood. The voices were faint but unmistakable. Mark and Sarah. They were in the living room, their tones low and tense. Emily hesitated for a moment, unsure if she should investigate further. But curiosity and a growing sense of dread pushed her forward. She cracked her bedroom door open just enough to peek into the hallway. The light from the living room spilled onto the carpet, casting long shadows that danced along the walls. Creeping closer, Emily positioned herself behind the staircase railing where she could see them without being noticed. Mark sat on the couch, with his head in his hands while Sarah stood facing him, arms crossed tightly over her chest. The air between them felt heavy, charged with unspoken tension. "I don't know what to do anymore," Mark said, his voice tinged with frustration. "She's always accusing me of things I didn't even do." Sarah's expression softened slightly, though her tone remained firm. "You're not exactly innocent here, Mark. You've been pushing her buttons for months, standing too close, making comments about how grown-up she looks. Did you really think she wouldn't notice?" Mark let out a bitter laugh, running a hand through his hair. "So now you're taking her side, after everything I've done for this family?" "It's not about sides," Sarah snapped, her voice rising before she lowered it again. "It's about trust. You've been isolating her from me, trying to make her look unreliable so I wouldn't believe her. Why would you do that?" Emily's breath caught in her throat. Was her mom finally seeing the truth? She clutched the railing, leaning closer to hear every word. "I never meant to hurt anyone," Mark muttered, avoiding Sarah's gaze. I wanted us to feel like a real family, and Emily kept ruining that." "No," Sarah interrupted, sharply. "You ruined it. By lying, by manipulating, and by ignoring how much pain you've caused her." The room fell silent, except for the faint ticking of the clock. Emily's mind raced with questions. Had Mark admitted to everything? Would her mom finally stand up for her? Before she could process it all, Mark suddenly glanced toward the stairs. His eyes widened when he spotted Emily hiding there. "Emily," he called out, his voice sharp. "Were you eavesdropping?" Caught off guard, Emily froze, unsure whether to run or stay. But before she could move, Sarah turned around and saw her too. For a brief moment, mother and daughter locked eyes. Emily's heart pounded as she braced herself for another lecture, or worse, denial. Instead, Sarah took a step toward her, her face filled with a mix of guilt and resolve. "Emily," she said softly, "how much did you hear?" Tears welled up in Emily's eyes as she stepped into the living room. "Enough," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Enough to know you finally believe me." Sarah looked down, visibly shaken. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart. I should have listened to you sooner." Mark shifted uncomfortably on the couch, clearly uneasy now that the truth was out in the open. But Emily barely noticed him. All she could focus on was her mom's apology, the first real acknowledgement of the pain she'd endured for so long. As the night wore on, Sarah promised to take action. She assured Emily that things would change, that they would figure out a way to protect her. Though Emily wanted to trust her mom's words, part of her still felt wary. Trust wasn't something that could be rebuilt overnight. But for the first time in months, she allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, the nightmare was finally coming to an end. The next morning, the house felt different, charged with an unspoken tension that hung heavy in the air. Emily woke up to find Sarah already in the kitchen, pacing back and forth while clutching a mug of coffee. Her mom's face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep. It was clear she had spent most of the night wrestling with what to next. Mark, on the other hand, avoided everyone. He stayed locked in his home office, pretending to work but clearly trying to stay out of sight. The silence between them spoke volumes. For once, Emily didn't feel like the one being scrutinized or dismissed. Instead, it was Mark, who seemed uneasy, glancing over his shoulder whenever someone entered the room. Later that day, Sarah called Emily into the living room for a serious talk. She sat on the edge of the couch, fidgeting with her hands as if unsure where to begin. "Emily," she started, her voice soft but firm, "I need you to know how sorry I am for not believing you sooner, for letting this go on as long as it has. You deserved better from me." Emily nodded slowly, her throat tight with emotion. She wanted to forgive her mom, but the wounds ran deep. "What happens now?" she asked cautiously. "I'm filing for divorce," Sarah said without hesitation. "Mark can't stay here anymore. This isn't the life I want for us, for you." Relief washed over Emily, but it was quickly followed by skepticism. After so many months of feeling ignored, she couldn't help but wonder if her mom would follow through this time. "Are you sure?" she asked quietly. "You won't change your mind?" Sarah reached out and took Emily's hand, squeezing it gently. "No more chances for him, I promise." True to her word, Sarah acted quickly. By the end of the week, Mark's belongings were packed into boxes and loaded into his car. When he left, he didn't say much, just muttered something about needing space to think. Emily watched from her bedroom window as his car disappeared down the street, a mixture of triumph and caution swirling inside her. Though he was gone, the scars he'd left behind weren't so easily erased. In the days that followed, Sarah made an effort to reconnect with Emily. They went for walks together after dinner, talked about school, and even tried baking cookies. A messy but comforting attempt at bonding. But rebuilding trust wasn't easy. Every time Sarah brushed off Emily's concerns or hesitated to answer a question, old fears resurfaced. One evening, while clearing the dishes, Emily decided to address the elephant in the room. "Mom," she began hesitantly, "do you really believe me now? About everything?" Sarah stopped mid-motion, setting the plate in her hand onto the counter. She turned to face Emily, her expression filled with regret. "Yes, sweetheart, I do. And I hate myself for waiting so long to see it. I let my fear of losing our family cloud my judgment. But I swear things will be different moving forward." To show she meant it, Sarah enrolled both of them in therapy. At first, Emily resisted, unsure if talking to a stranger could help. But during their sessions, she slowly began opening up about her feelings of betrayal, her anger toward Mark, and her lingering doubts about whether her mom truly understood the depth of her pain. Sarah listened intently, tears streaming down her face as she realized just how much her daughter had suffered in silence. Through counseling, Emily also learned tools to process her emotions and regain control of her life. For the first time in months, she started sleeping better at night. The nightmares about Mark watching her from the doorway became less frequent, replaced by dreams of brighter days ahead. Though healing wouldn't happen overnight, Emily felt hopeful. With her mom finally standing by her side and Mark out of their lives, it seemed possible to rebuild what had been broken. And though the road ahead would still have its challenges, she knew they could face them together, one step at a time.